Mission and margin is the business of healthcare. Some physician practices grow by providing better patient outcomes and experience. Those practices need capital to fund growth. As a source of capital, is private equity better at supporting growth? Does a practice taking private equity investment run the risk of overly aggressive patient recruitment and billing? Do private equity partners help practices engage the right patients for growth? We explore these questions with a physician practice entrepreneur and his private equity investment partner. Gautam Shrikhande is founder and chief executive officer of Pelvic Rehabilitation Medicine. The physicians of Pelvic Rehabilitation Medicine, or PRM, treat men and women suffering from chronic core pelvic muscle and nerve problems, chronic pelvic pain, and pelvic floor muscle dysfunction. Brian Rath is operating partner of Lorient Capital. Lorient Capital provides capital and guidance to help healthcare businesses achieve meaningful growth. Dr. Gautam Shrikhande and Brian Rath, thank you so much for joining the business of healthcare today. Dr. Shrikhande, how did pelvic rehab medicine get started?
Essentially started when my wife had her kind of own postpartum pelvic issues, and over several years developed a novel kind of treatment approach to the management and treatment of chronic pelvic pain. And concomitantly, I myself am a vascular surgeon, worked in a hospital system for many years and transitioned over into the private equity setting, and thought, wow, this is quite impressive what you're doing, and I see that you're making an impact with a lot of lives. And we kind of joined forces in 2017, and we opened up Pelvic Rehabilitation Medicine.
And tell me a little bit more about your patient value proposition. Who's the patient you serve, and what exactly are you doing to help them?
Yeah, I mean, our patients overall are highly underdiagnosed and undertreated. It's really people that have chronic pelvic pain greater than 6 months, anywhere from the region between the belly button and the top of the thighs. And it affects 10% of the population, yet no one is really specifically addressing it. And the reason that is because it's a complicated disease process and there's a wide range of etiologies. So what we do is we look at it from a more holistic approach with a multidisciplinary vantage point, some allopathic modalities, some more holistic modalities, and we also have a novel treatment protocol which addresses a lot of the muscles and the nerves, which specifically innervate and are the muscles of the pelvic floor. And
Brian, your firm, a significant private equity firm, talk a little bit about your firm and how it fits into the landscape of private equity firms that are investing in healthcare services in physician practices.
Yeah, sure. There's actually, there's a lot of firms ultimately that are investing, within broader healthcare. I mean, if I had to guess from a private equity standpoint, there's over 100 firms that are investing within healthcare. That are, financial sponsors. Within that, there's a subset that really focus and do work within physician practices and physician practice management. In terms of where we fit and a little bit of our differentiation and how we deploy capital is, we're going to be lower middle market, if not below that. We get in earlier, we get in at the ground level, which really means we're starting smaller. Our origins were really from a family office standpoint, where we all were a group of healthcare operators, healthcare entrepreneurs. So we think of ourselves really not under the moniker of private equity, but just individual experience in healthcare operations with a pool of capital that are willing to get in earlier to do some of the heavier lifting to create what many would call a platform deal that would be valuable to other sponsors in the space that are investing. But, for us, we're really rooted in that healthcare operations origins, and where we want to take a longer term view on a thesis and kind of hold that conviction for a longer term and do the heavier lifting, like I said, to get it to where it is a platform. So that's, that's a little bit of where we fit and how we're different.
And when you say a platform, meaning that the portfolio of investments is a platform, or meaning that the target company that you're investing in individually they become platforms?
Sure. When I say platform, it's really a term that's overused within private equity of an asset that is valuable to a financial sponsor that has components in it that they see that often drive higher valuation multiples, that it has built in, full suite of a management team, kind of advanced technologies, has regional scale, has a higher growth rate, just some of those business components of when private equity will talk about making a platform investment. Commonplace is it's the first investment within a dedicated strategy, but it's also conceptual around the business itself. And so again, for us, looking at some of our businesses, we'll get in before it really has some of those business components in place. And arguably that's some of our value proposition to our partners and the leaders of those companies that we partner with is we'll help them build some of those structural elements that would then ultimately be viewed as a platform deal for the next sponsor or strategic acquirer that would come along.
So you're a big part of your investment hypothesis is that there's a kernel of something here that you're investing in, and you're going to, through almost adding consultative value, you're going to help the organization grow into that, and then that gives you the return or multiple return that you look for in your capital.
Yeah, I mean, from an overall hypothesis, that's right. I think a lot of the investments that we've made, and we have strategies and other healthcare subverticals beyond physician practices, but a lot of the components are of creating really that business building effort, creating that infrastructure where we can build value organically, not just from an organic growth standpoint, but inherent to how the business is run. But a lot of that again takes some effort. Requires you to be in the trenches and do that heavy lifting that as you scale into larger private equity funds, some of the expectation is that a lot of that is already in place because of the time that it can take. And there's the execution risk on making those right decisions and how to develop it that is where we see some of the value prop. A lot of private equity traditionally will underwrite to some level of financial engineering in their returns of just creating scale, consolidation, realizing the synergies of that scale. Those are natural components to our underwriting as well as we are investing into growth businesses that are scaling. But it's not really a core tenet. I think there's other areas as we think about investment hypotheses that we focus more on. But definitely an underlying value for us is getting in early and creating that infrastructure for growth.
When you think about pelvic rehabilitation medicine or PRM, when you think about that investment decision, what drew you to PRM?
That's probably a long answer. There's a lot of factors to it. I think ultimately what it hits on just fundamentally against our investment hypotheses is a lot of the tenets that we're looking for of things like improving access to care, improving clinical outcomes, improving patient experience, and ultimately lowering cost of care. As you think about the triple aim in healthcare, that should be commonplace in any underwriting thesis. If you're a healthcare investor, I think PRM stands a chance to really solve for a lot of those components. But underlying it, I think there's a uniqueness to the company and to the asset and just really the clinical side of it, which is where I think we really had this aha moment of spending time with Gautam initially and reading the clinical literature to understand that there's a major problem that PRM is looking to solve, that there is a very large incidence of disease that is undertreated today and often has a significant rate of misdiagnosis, which there's reasons for it, but pain is nebulous and the pelvic region is complex and there's a poor existing treatment protocols, and really the experience today of individuals is quite terrible. If you look at the individuals that are afflicted by chronic pelvic pain and some of their root cause conditions. So clinically first, we saw PRM as responding to all of those issues, where, as Gautam touched on, it's the unique treatment protocol really helps discover some of those root cause conditions, so we can really drive towards an actual, ultimate outcome for the patient. And we can do some other interesting things clinically in terms of research and integrating areas around, opioid reduction and mental health. So that really struck a chord with us on a patient first, mission driven, physician led business. From a business standpoint, it touched on a lot of things that you don't often see in physician practices. It's actually a highly scalable model. It's entirely outpatient. There's fewer frictions to growth. Commonly in physician practice deals, there's frictions in the sense of local market competition, the referral network, the reliance on inpatient and hospitals and their dominance. But I think for PRM, we saw that there was fewer frictions to that growth. And with Gautam and his team, they had experience in other prior businesses around scaling physician practice models and experiencing some velocity to growth. But one other piece of it that was really interesting to me is thinking about the patient and the journey that they're on and how large the problem was. And the solution that we had was I saw a very large B2C angle with this of how to speak directly to the consumer and the patient and how we could take some more modern ways of thinking and advertising and marketing to them and just, have a large channel of B2C that is, again, not necessarily commonplace with physician practices, but certainly in a modern world with, high deductible health plans and more patient consumerism, the PRM just hit on so many facets of areas of interest. And it was a large unmet need. So I'll stop there.
Dr. Shrikhande, you came to PRM or formed PRM with your partner and wife, but prior to that, you had played a clinical leadership role in a complex health system. You had also spent some time working in private equity. Talk just a little bit about that journey prior to PRM and that interesting combination of experience you bring.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was one of those old school vascular surgery residencies, 9 years of training, really grew up in the hospital-based systems and, firsthand experienced some of the frustrating aspects of working within a hospital and large kind of bureaucratic environments. Not that they don't have an important function in society for sure, but just some areas found to be, very cumbersome. And that kind of led me along into within the New York Presbyterian system in the Queens region. They formed a large outpatient medical group. So I found that to be forward thinking in the sense that they were trying to bring a subset of patient care to the outpatient setting. And I was the medical director for surgery for that outpatient practice development. So that was an eye-opening experience in terms of realizing, to streamline healthcare in an outpatient setting requires a lot of infrastructure, and the infrastructure requires, thoughtfulness, requires capital. And just because you're doing something outpatient, you still need to execute it properly. And just understanding really the real nuances of practice management systems, electronic health records, revenue cycle management. And so that was a wonderful experience. And from there, I went into the private equity sector. And that's where I really started to get into a little bit more of the nuances of velocity. So, okay, the need. There is capital now, but now you got to execute and really take it to that next level of, okay, let's execute, but, you got to do it in a relatively efficient fashion so we can get to the scale that we want to get. So that was, that's been I just summarized about 15 years in that little blurb there. But essentially, that's kind of, how I came into it with PRM, understanding the challenges, having made a lot of mistakes, but knowing really kind of what's required to become highly successful in an outpatient privatized setting.
So you come to PRM, a business model that you worked on quite a bit prior to launch, and you formed it initially without private equity as funding. Tell me about that journey from concept to launch to the decision to bring private equity in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially one day, my wife and I were like, okay, well, there's a huge need here. And, looks like you're serving an unmet need. So I sat down and I wrote a business plan. I mean, in my prior settings, we had to write business plans for every new market we were going to enter. So we wrote a business plan, took it to some funding sources, really essentially bank loans. And fortunately, we were one bank was nice enough to give us a loan, and then we just went from there to the formation of corporation, into the build out of the offices, all kinds of that nitty gritty, just getting to day zero, bringing on electronic health records. And concomitantly, I had some of my close friends that I work with in my prior worlds who are really experienced in the world of healthcare operations. And I felt like if we're going to open a business, there's no way we could do that unless patients are happy. If you don't have patients, you don't have anything. If they're waiting, you could deliver the best healthcare in the world, but if they're waiting in the waiting room for 48 minutes, it doesn't matter. So really to focus on operations and patient satisfaction early and often. And concomitantly, if you have no patients, then it doesn't matter. So I brought in one of my old friends who I worked with, who's really good at medical service, physician liaisoning, and medical device sales. And having him help me connect the dots between our referring community and to the services we provide. I mean, ultimately, what we provide is a novel service, and our biggest challenge is awareness of what we do, not necessarily competition at this point. So really trying to build that team of let's get the community aware of what we do, and let's also strive for high level patient satisfaction, all in addition to the excellent quality of care, which was the foundation of why we even started in the first place.
So you form, you launch, patients start showing up, which is always always a good thing. Yeah. And then at some point in time, you said, all right, now it's time to accelerate velocity. Now it's time to bring private equity in. Tell me about that moment of decision.
Yeah, I mean, I really, when we first launched, we were more of a business to business type of healthcare service. We understand the marketing requirements nowadays, and we realize that you need to have a robust B2C component. So part of my reasoning significant amount of my reasoning for looking for private equity funding, first of all, was velocity. I believe that when we saw such a large outpouring of patients in New York and New Jersey, I realized that we need to get out there much faster. And I didn't, the formation of the infrastructure required with that, and the amount of kind of brain power behind, really better executing on a B2C angle, I think those are some really important concepts that I wanted to bring in some outside investment money, but also extraordinarily intelligent people who can help me, get to a larger outreach throughout the country, B, set up the corporate infrastructure required to build that outreach out and to build more offices, and C, really start to brainstorm how, yes, we do get a lot of referral sources from the OBGYNs and pelvic floor physical therapists and urologists in a more traditional fashion, but also really start to hone in on this business to consumer aspect of healthcare, because I agree with Brian. I mean, patients now are starting to get their healthcare information on the internet based on their signs and symptoms. They're not necessarily Googling the doctor and the healthcare system saying, this is where I want to go. They have a lot of choices. They can go a lot of different places, and really trying to stay out ahead of that, particularly for our disease process, where it really is a symptom and sign driven search. So partnering with some really intelligent people to have those conversations with, and as I've learned, you do need to have capital able to participate in that type of B2C aspect of, patient outreach. So really it's many reasons, is why I was looking for a private equity partner, and then meeting Brian Rath was, the next kind of blessing that happened randomly in New York City at a conference we were at. And we just started getting to talk, and it just organically developed over several months. We had multiple conversations, and realizing that, Brian and his organization, Lorient, with Mark Mitchell, they really do want to take the time to roll up their sleeves and get involved, A, and B, they actually took the time to understand that this is a different aspect of healthcare. This is not a urology roll-up or an ortho roll-up. This is a nuanced aspect of healthcare where you really do need to understand the suffering that the patients are going through to most accurately be able to identify the patient population that's out there. And I felt that they really just got it. And to me, that was super exciting to find people that actually completely understand our patient and what we're dealing with. So, and then really from there, once we kind of realized that we had very similar visions, from there, the actual partnership evolved very quickly. From the time I met Brian, I believe it was, August, September of 2018, we were closed right in the new year of 2019. It was a very exciting time for PRM.
And that's a intimate relationship. You closed on February 14th, as symbolic of the intimacy of the relationship.
Yes.
You talked. There's two ideas there that you touched on. I want to go a little deeper on. You touched on the idea of B2C versus B2B, which actually are words that I don't normally hear physician practice leaders reference. But you're making a very important distinction. Can you talk a little bit about why that distinction is so important?
Yeah, sure. I mean, B2B essentially means, business to business. So a doctor referring to a doctor. And, in pharma, there's a lot of, selling of pills and med device. There's a lot of sales involved with using catheters and balloons. But in the medical service aspect, which is where I spent some of my time in prior private equity days, it's not as common to have, I hate using the word sales, but it's not that often to have, we call them liaisons, to go out literally door to door, similar to a pharma or med device rep, and educate the referring community about what services we provide. That's something I really embraced. I feel like how can we be a leader in the community and leader of what we do if our peers don't even know what we do? So we spent a lot of time and investment on, Salesforce.com and really educating the referring OBGYNs, urologists, and pelvic floor physical therapists. Then layered on top of that, we're extremely interested in B2C, meaning business to consumer. And that's the patient sitting at their office saying, I have pain in my pelvic area. Or they're sitting on their couch at 10 at night saying, I'm having intimacy issues and I don't know why. And really trying to understand how to reach out to that patient. And it's a whole world of the science of the search and the science of, trying to understand what the patient is searching for. And there's so many different ways to reach to that patient, whether it's Google or Bing or Facebook or Instagram, or there's all types of services involved with that. And just trying to understand that eternal science of the journey of that search and how to deploy capital to best connect with that patient. So those are really two aspects that we have layered on top of each other here at PRM.
Brian, tell me a little bit about as you came into the PRM relationship. Tell me about the portfolio of capabilities you brought to the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, there's the I'd call the boilerplate answer, which is not really a differentiation of Lorient or another fund, which is there's tangible items that you bring to a physician practice in terms of building out a C-suite and a management team and leadership, technical capabilities around financial management and technologies, access to experts, and developing automation of processes. I mean, these are kind of business concepts that exist everywhere, but oftentimes are missing in physician practices. Just a lot of them are run in an old school mindset, old school way of setting up leadership and really leadership by committee. The intangibles, though, is what I think, I spent time thinking about this of what do we bring? If we're not differentiated in some of the items that we bring relative to another fund, the truth is first and foremost, we bring knowledge and experience from all the mistakes we've made previously with other practices, with other companies. And there's real truth in that. Managing physician practices is hard, and there's a lot of mistakes to be made. And you can make mistakes based on the type of specialty you're in and the local market dynamics. So in truth, I think first and foremost, we bring knowledge around the mistakes that we've made before, and each new investment benefits from that. But I think, conceptually, some of the intangible things are with the concept of building leadership and management. It's, for us, the way we think about it is accountability and running an organization with a culture of accountability, not just in the negative sense of that word, but also in the positive sense of how do we run an organization that is driving towards common goals, and its individuals are held accountable to those goals. And that really is what pushes the pace of growth, is the individuals within that organization, driving that direction and knowing that they'll be held accountable. I think the other, kind of conceptual piece is consistency. And that's just having a capital partner. And this is the idea of just a physician practice partnering with private equity, or just a financial sponsor it's about staying the course, and that as you enter into a partnership, you're going to have a long-term thesis. And if left to, I'd say their own devices, a typical physician practice might, by management of committee and executive committee and stakeholders, might run off on tangents and lose sight of the thesis. So I think part of what we bring is a reminder and keeping everyone honest and staying consistent to why we're doing this. And that's really important as I think about how Lorient invests in that we're taking on, I'd say, bigger projects and more complex business building models. It's easy to forget when you're in the weeds and in the trenches of why you're doing it, and it's requiring behavior decisions. So staying consistent is important. And then the last thing is, I think Gautam could probably speak to this, is conviction. Again, this is the concept of beyond just bringing capital, but it's, if we entered into this thesis together at the onset, we had the greatest amount of conviction. And so with that, along the way, pushing leadership, pushing the physician leadership, in this case, pushing Gautam to maintain that conviction and having a willingness to pull investments forward on a timeline and pull actions forward to build ahead of growth. I say to him when we're talking about certain hires of, if it comes around the time that you think you're realizing that you need that hire, it's too late. So let's maintain some conviction in what we're doing and that we will be successful, obviously with having prudence around financial management and not overextending yourself. But those are kind of, I think, the conceptual pieces of just any partner, but how I like to think about my role of, it's not just the basic blocking and tackling, that really I'm no differentiated than the rest. Maybe I've made more mistakes than others, so I have more to offer in my key learnings, but it's how I view what I'm really bringing and how to help guide physicians and their leadership to get towards our end goal.
And Dr. Shrikhande, your value proposition, that this idea of the direct-to-consumer or B2C marketing, it's fundamentally because there's no straightforward billing code for, solving pelvic pain. You're in this conundrum of having to not only train your peers about your capabilities, but also make the consumer aware. You made a reference to I think Brian Cush, Tidal Health Group, and the work that you've done with him in the Google search. And just talk about the Google search. You're in such an interesting moment in healthcare. Talk about how that fits in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when we first started working with Tidal Way Marketing, started to look at what was bringing patients to our landing page, we found that over 90% of the searches were completely de novo, have never been searched at all, period, on Google. So that was the beginning. And since then, literally on a weekly basis, we've been trying to say, what are they searching for? Is it urinary chronic pelvic pain syndrome? Is it pain with intercourse is it infertility and pelvic pain? I mean, all these searches and words, there had been a wide range of traffic around it, but not specific. It was bringing them to our landing site. So we started to absorb all that information over time and started to create content on our website around what the patient was looking for. So it's really been this kind of back and forth on a weekly basis for the last several years of trying to create content and to explain to the patient what exactly it is that we do so that we can help them. And not help them so we can do more billing codes, like you say, but help them because if they don't come to us, they're going to see 8 other doctors in the meantime trying to help them. So we're trying to get patients, the information they need and the care they need in a much more streamlined, efficient fashion. Not because the other physicians aren't able to take care of it, but what we do takes a lot of time and understanding of very specifically the pelvis. And we feel that if the patient can come to us faster because we are able to reach out to them better with the terminology and the keywords that we have on our website, we can actually overall shorten that patient's miserable journey and get them to a land of getting back to normal life, having relations, being able to go to work, having less absenteeism, etc.
And so there's a science here. There's a science of patient acquisition. I would imagine that Tidal Health brought some of that to you. But take me a little deeper. What is that science in such an unusual target audience that you're going after?
Yeah, literally, there's dashboards where we look every day what is bringing people to our landing page, and then we look at the dashboards, we look at the terms, we look at the words, and then we say, okay, how can we better capture that patient to come to our website? And then from there, we create a Google AdWord campaign or on Bing, as Bing is the Bing is the default search engine on Microsoft, which is one of the default desktop programs in most Fortune 500 companies. So whether it be Google or Bing, we create AdWord campaigns where we buy around those terms that people are searching for so that our position comes up higher on Google so that, patients don't have to scroll as far down to find us, literally. And concomitantly with that, we do similar on Facebook and on Instagram because the demographic of Facebook tends to be 30s, 40s now. Instagram tends to be 20s, 30s. So trying to capture and reach out to those patients via Instagram and Facebook and having Instagram and Facebook tie into our webpage. So they're all intricately connected behind the scenes. And again, there's still brand new search terms that come to our website that 3 years ago we never have seen. So it's literally a weekly kind of process to keep the content fresh and to stay up with what the consumer is searching for.
And is growth in your practice more driven by that B2C, that direct-to-consumer engagement?
It's a great question. Initially when we started, I would say about 75% of our patients came from our physician liaison outreach B2B program, and 25% were coming from B2C. But as now, 3 years in, that's becoming 50-50. And I definitely see as we have a much better understanding of it and we're putting more resources behind it, I could see over time how that can essentially flip-flop, where 2/3 to 3/4 of our patients would come from a B2C angle, and the remaining would come from our business-to-business platform that we have.
And Brian, patient acquisition, Brian, is part of the magic or value proposition that you bring. Talk to me a little bit about how you see this transforming. How is the science of patient acquisition changing?
Yeah, I think from a physician practice standpoint, oftentimes the story is different than what PRM had when we started, and especially what it has now as I think of just an older school way of engaging with patients and placing ads that say we do surgery and just trying to get in front of patients that way, or doing the B2B side of it is doing dinners with referring providers, and those are all valuable ways to go about it. But in my mind, patient acquisition consumer marketing, it's not just around the ad placement and the digital search. It's what's important in my mind is the comprehensive view of how we get in front of our patients and engage with them and how many touch points we have, because we don't know always where they're going to come from, when they're going to make that association of a PRM may have a solution for them. And then I think the ultimate level being that PRM is a brand that understands my problem and understands my plight. So I think of it at the levels of sophistication for us is, starting point of do they understand that we have a product for them? Then it's, do they understand that we're content experts and have the best product for them? And then ultimately understand that what our brand stands for, is that we understand them as an individual. And that's the association I think we're trying to work towards. So I think what that means on a day-to-day basis is PRM implementing all facets of it, of putting out content digitally that speaks to our being the experts in the field, that we do know more than the rest. Getting boots on the ground liaisons with the referring providers to help educate them and create awareness, doing some white glove tailoring things around the B2B program of, when a patient comes in and they tell us who they've seen on the 5 times before they tried seeing a specialist, those are opportunities to go target those 5 providers and educate them to our patient population and how they could send us future patients. And then the digital side of it is, Title Health has been fantastic. And as you noted, Brian Cush has led that of even before we joined in partnership with PRM, they were doing great things in terms of how they were constantly testing on a weekly basis. And that's important when you look at digital spend from a paid search standpoint, is always testing, always innovating, and what works last week doesn't work what works this week. I think what we've added since then is the concept around ROI of spend, and we've really pushed them of, it's when we're thinking about the dollars that the actual dollars we're putting towards marketing, is how do we look at ROI on that spend? And it's not just about the traditional metrics on digital of what are your website conversions and your goal successes in terms of click to call. But it's actually tying it in at another level of ROI to actual revenue generated from those conversions. And that's just a way of thinking for us of trying to prove out where we spend our dollars as we think about the more holistic approach of consumer acquisition, including the physical B2B, including the digital paid and the digital branding. If we can understand our true ROI, tying it back to practice revenue, I think we can operate at a much higher level and as a more consumer driven model than thinking of it as a physician practice. But that's hard, putting the investment into the systems in place and spending time actually on a programming side to tie in our EMR into our digital analytics has taken a long time. But same thing, we're making mistakes, we're innovating and doing kind of more rapid cycle changes on that. And we're discovering new ways that we can engage. But I think, for me, it's just, you mentioned the term, like, kind of the science of marketing. There absolutely is a science to it. But I think there's the art side of it is where we ultimately elevate to. And I've had this conversations with Gautam and Title Health, is elevating to where we're talking about our branding and putting dollars behind branding and not just being a transactional approach to marketing, but being a branding approach, and ultimately getting to where we can just speak to our patient and say, we understand, we have a solution for you. And then that all, I think, trickles down into everything else that we're doing.
Do there's a third stakeholder here that we've talked about, in terms of marketing and growing the practice, it's the consumer, the referring physician. The third stakeholder is the payer. And that brings us to I think an interesting intersection here. From a value proposition, is the value proposition of PRM compelling on the payer side? Is there a utilization story to the large employer that PRM offers, from your perspective, Brian?
Yes, it is my belief that that's absolutely true. I think it's going to take us time to get to that, where we can prove that out, with actual evidence. Where we need our evidence around clinical outcomes, around financial outcomes. But it's absolutely part of our original thesis when we invested, that there is a value-based proposition here. And that requires you understanding our patient and their journey, where if you were to go on PRM's website and look at some of the testimonials or think about one of the 30 root cause conditions that we diagnose and ultimately treat being endometriosis, just picking on that one, you have patients who have gone through 10 years of not finding the answer in their ultimate diagnosis, having gone through 5, 10, sometimes 15 surgeries to treat what they just were told that was chronic pelvic pain. They've been put on opioids. They've struggled with mental health. So you think about the spend over the time series, the lifetime spend of an individual. We believe that relative to our treatment protocol, which was at its root a diagnostic tool, where we've now built in service lines around it where we can also be the treatment and protocol, that we believe by going through our protocol, we can identify that root cause condition earlier, coordinate that care to what we're now integrating other service lines, and with that, we can prove out that we'll actually lower the total cost of care for that individual, while also, more importantly, dramatically improving the life of that individual. And there's a lot of that intangible pieces that you can't measure, but as Gautam made a reference to, presence, absenteeism at work, or when you're there, you're not really present because you're struggling with pain. So I think we have a long way to go to be able to make that legitimate argument with data and cost measurements. But that was absolutely a core tenet of our underwriting and working with PRM.
And Dr. Shrikhande, when you conceived of PRM and your wife and you developed the vision, how much was this idea of lowering overall utilization for these patients? How much was that a part of the vision you were going after?
I would say it was a big part of the vision. The tricky part with that is, sometimes you need to, treat a lot more patients, and thereby you're driving up utilization to be able to capture a large enough cohort of data to prove the hypothesis. So, that's something that I really enjoyed in our initial discussions with Lorient Capital, saying, okay, well, let's invest in the systems that are going to be required to capture that data of patient-reported outcomes so that when we treat a large enough cohort of patients, we can publish on that and we can start to prove this hypothesis. So absolutely, we're in a heavy fee-for-service society. And, in America, I think that's a long time for that to change. But we are headed toward, a value-based care type of reimbursement model. And it may take years to decades for that ever to truly hit here or to evolve into that. But I felt very strongly that I want to position ourselves in that way from the very outset. And again, that's why we're investing, very refreshing. Lorient Capital, we created a nonprofit organization and invest and pay a research assistant to capture this data for us. We believe there's a lot of anxiety and depression in this patient population, so we're investing in behavioral health models to help, get our patients better, even though they may not be revenue generating types of services that we provide. So, that whole, let's capture this, let's show that we are eventually saving the system money and invest into that now. That was very much at the forefront of my mind. But what was surprising to me is that Lorient also very much believes in that philosophy, which I believe was the biggest differentiator with Brian and Lorient.
If you think about physician practice or surgery centers or medical device or pharma, what you're doing is you're taking an integrative approach, putting all those things together and actually creating a new product that is wholly and distinctly different than what's existed before. It's I guess, the creation of a medical device on steroids, sort of. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I think completely. And I think it just speaks to the fact that 10% of our country has this, yet there's no one that does this. So that's what I find completely shocking and eye-opening, that no one does this in a privatized fashion, which is why, it I'm not saying we have the perfect solution right now, but I am saying that I agree that we're taking an integrative approach from many different aspects of healthcare and applying, many of those aspects to our disease process and to our organization. Yes.
Dr. Gautam Shrikhande, Brian Rath, thank you so much for joining the Business of Healthcare today.
Watch, listen, or read Business of Healthcare interviews at bohseries.com.